Thank you. ¿Qué pasó ahora?
All right, just about ready to get started. That's zoomed in a little bit to make it easier for people to read off the screen. All right, looks like we are up and running. The technology seems to be working more or less correctly. We'll find out. All right, good evening to everyone. And it is practically evening time. We're right on the cusp, at least it was last time I was driving in a few minutes ago, as the seasons change and we're moving firmly into the grip of fall and the days are getting a little shorter. But it's still good to have our days rounded off with a little bit of Mishnah study. I'm glad that people continue to join for our study. We are going to carry on with Mishnah Keritot. We are in chapter 2, and we are on Mishnah 5 tonight. Just a quick reminder that at the end of at the end of Mishnah 4, which was a very long Mishnah, as you can see, both in the translation and even in the Hebrew, that this particular translation had a gap missing that began where we should be talking about this additional person called a shifcha, this maidservant. And we talked about specifically the differences between the case where somebody is sleeping with this shifcha, this maidservant, who is already betrothed to someone else. Now, the problem is we didn't get a full definition of this maidservant, of this shifcha. And so in chapter 5, we're going to go into detail of her unique legal identity. As we're going to see, in order for what we were talking about in Mishnah 4 to be applicable, it has to fit a very particular set of circumstances. With that in mind, let's go ahead and get rolling. So who is the espoused? Who is this betrothed maidservant in question? Who were we talking about at the end of Mishnah 4? It is any woman who is half maidservant, half free woman. Now that probably sounds a little weird, and it certainly will sound weird to the modern ear. What it means is a maidservant who belonged to two masters, one whom liberated her, as it is stated, and she was redeemed and not redeemed, which means that she was partially but not completely redeemed. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. All right, so Rabbi Yehuda here has a proposition based upon the way the way the verse is phrased, to say that since, and I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the translation on this, that since the full verse talks about somebody who sleeps with a woman who is a slave and has been designated for another man, but has not been redeemed or given her freedom, there shall be an indemnity. They shall not, however, be put to death, since she has not been freed. He is not technically considered committed adultery, and so that's why we have the unusual circumstances that we talked about with the various offerings and other issues in last week's class. Now, the language that Rabbi Yehuda is picking up on is this unusual phrase that's right here at the end, right? That she has been betrothed to a man, but Havde lo niftata, right? That she is freed, or rather redeemed, and not redeemed. Now, this translation gives us that version as been redeemed or given her freedom, trying to have two different words. But really, the Hebrew is a doubling of that same root of redemption. Now, I looked to see if any of the translations try to give us a clearer view. The Rashi translation, which is often a very interesting translation because it tries to blend Rashi into the text of the Torah itself, renders it a little differently, using the phrase, if he lies with a woman, a lying of seed, meaning actually having full relations, and she be Canaanite maidservant, half bondswoman, free woman, bound, betrothed to another man, a Hebrew bondsman, and she has not been redeemed with money or freedom, has not been given to her by writ, she shall be inquired, and afterwards towards demand, blah, 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 blah. Right? So you'll notice all the brackets are what Rashi brings and what the halakha brings regarding this situation. And what this translation is trying to do is read back into the Torah the implications of this verse in the Torah. Now, I'm not a big fan of writing that into the Torah itself, because when you write it into the Torah text, even with brackets, people often misunderstand where the Torah stops and where the commentary and analysis begins. However, the Koran Bible provides an interesting version. And the way that they try to do this is by using the phrase, not wholly redeemed, which is giving a hint towards our particular discussion in the Mishnah without making it too slam dunk without making there no room for analysis. Because as we're going to see, there is controversy over this interpretation. So it's very difficult, as we've talked about before, to translate, even harder to translate in a way that leaves enough ambiguity for the differences of opinion that we see in the Mishnah and even more later in the Talmud. And I think that there's never a perfect way to do this. But where I just wanted to share with you a little bit of how people struggle to handle this sort of issue. So the upshot of this is that this unique situation has to be in a case where the woman has two owners, meaning that they are both have a partial ownership of her servitude, and one of the owners has given her freedom, meaning he has relinquished his claim to her servitude in perpetuity. The other person, of course, is still a partial owner because he has not made that same relinquishment. And in such a case, she is both free and not free, free from one and not free from the other. And that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Everybody following his logic and how he is trying to use the terminology of our verse to reach that point. Okay. However, Rabbi Yishmael says, an espoused maiden, betrothed maiden, is a full-fledged maidservant whose status is certain, meaning she is completely a shifcha, not half and half. As the language of our verse does not mean redeemed and not redeemed, it is simply a way of stating that she has not been redeemed. Now, Rabbi Ishmael is closer to our original translation, where in the original translation that we looked at, which is the JPS translation, says she has not been redeemed or given her freedom. It is a emphasis by having this doubling of language. It is not meant to say that she is partially freed. It's meant to say she is absolutely, completely not freed, which, as you can tell by the translation, is a possible way of understanding it. We have a third opinion on this topic, though. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, all those with whom relations are forbidden are enumerated in the Torah, and we have no exception other than one who is half maidservant, half free women. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov agrees with our first opinion and says, no, this has to be somebody with half freedom and half not freedom. And not because the verse itself makes that clear in and of itself. He is agreeing with Rabbi Ishmael that there is enough ambiguity that it could be understood in the way that Rabbi Ishmael takes it, to mean that she is a regular 100% maidservant with no half freedom issues. But because all of the other arayot, all of the other forbidden relationships are enumerated and spelled out with enough detail, we know for certain that this one has to be the implied half free, half not free that is talked about elsewhere. that they knew existed. So basically what he is saying is by the process of elimination and by fitting the appropriate circumstance, we can deduce that this situation must be dealing with somebody who is half freed and half not freed. And so he agrees in practice with Rabbi Yehuda, although he disagrees with him on how to get there. Okay, any questions on that point? Like I said, it's complicated. That's why I wanted to save it till we had a little more time to work on it today. But it is another interesting example of how the text of the Torah is not quite so obvious in its interpretation to a casual observer. As I often will say, it pains me greatly when someone says, I read the Torah and I go by the literal meaning, because there is no literal meaning that stands by itself. Every literal meaning needs interpretation, understanding, and discussion. And this is a perfect example that somebody who tried to literally read this verse 20 from chapter 19 of Vayikra would be very unlikely to come away with a meaningful text, and certainly not one that would lead to a proper analysis. All right, Mishnah number 6. And this will finish off our chapter 2. The Mishnah cites an additional difference between the status of an espoused maiden and the status of forbidden relatives, meaning the other arayot, the other people that are prohibited. So in comparison, this woman that is half freed and half not freed has the other following differences. In all cases of intercourse with those with whom relations are forbidden, meaning all of the other categories of one, if one is an adult and one is a minor, meaning if one of the partners is of mature age and one of them is of minor, below the age of maturity, the minor is exempt, right? If God forbid, an adult had relations with somebody that was underage, the underage person is not held liable for the action. That is not considered a crime for them to have done it, because they are under the age of majority. If one is awake and one is sleeping, meaning one partner was awake and the other was asleep, remembering that it doesn't have to be a lengthy consummation for a forbidden activity to occur. Penetration is enough. If one of them was awake and the other was sleeping, the sleeping one, again, is exempt. The one who was awake has the full liability. The one who was asleep is not to be held accountable for what happened. If one of them, meaning again, one partner commits the act unwittingly, didn't know what they were doing or who they were doing it with, and one does so intentionally, meaning that intentional action was with full knowledge of what they were doing, the one who did so unwittingly is liable to bring a sin offering, which we talked about earlier, and the one who did so intentionally is liable to be punished with karet, that the punishment is excision, to be cut out. By contrast, in a case of intercourse with the espoused maid servant, the man is liable to bring a guilt offering only if the woman is flogged. And that is the case only if she was an adult, awake, and committed the sin intentionally. If she was not an active and cognizant participant and of adult status, then she is not punished. And if she is not punished, then because of the way the verse was worded, he is not required to bring an offering either. So this is an extremely exceptional case. All right. Any further questions on this topic? I know that it's been perplexing, and I'm sure you're going to be happy to move on to a different topic in the next chapter. All right. Hearing no questions, seeing no hands up, let's move on to chapter 3. And I'm just going to roll it to place and then take a quick sip. All right, so in chapter 3, we are going to introduce and begin a discussion of what happens when a person does something wrong and other people point it out? How does that interplay work with everything we've been talking about so far? If witnesses said to a person, we saw that you ate forbidden fat. Chelev is a particular fat from around certain organs on the animal's body. And when you slaughter an animal, it is removed. It was part of what was offered on the altar, and it is not allowed to be eaten even for non-sacrificial animals in just regular meals. This is part of what a shochet, a slaughterer, a butcher would remove before the meat would go to market. But not everybody had a shochet. Some people were their own. That is to say, they would butcher their own animals. And in this particular case, the witnesses say to somebody, hey, I saw you eating yesterday, and I saw what you ate. And what you ate was from an area of the animal that was chelev, that is this forbidden fat, right? It was forbidden for you to eat that. In such a case, he is liable to bring a sin offering if he did so unwittingly. And so this is actually giving us a very useful example of how a accidental transgression might play out. There's a person, he slaughters his own sheep, he butchers it, and as he butchers it, he isn't aware of where the forbidden fat is, or he just makes a mistake as he prepares that part of the animal, and his neighbor happens to notice it, but notices it too late. He's already eaten it. The guy realizes it, and now he has to bring a sacrifice now that he recognizes from the witness's testimony that what he did was wrong and that he did it by mistake. Everyone with me so far? Okay, now we get complicated. If a witness says he ate forbidden fat and a witness says he did not eat forbidden fat, so now we have two witnesses, but they disagree about what they just witnessed. Or if a woman says he ate forbidden fat and a woman says he did not eat forbidden fat, remembering that women were generally not giving testimony, but in certain circumstances, they could bring information, but their information was only in conflict with other equal information. So a woman's information would balance off another woman's information, but not off a man's testimony. The different rulings regarding women's testimony is a very fascinating and complicated subject, and one that the conservative movement has had a lot to say about in the last decade, and that is the subject of another class. I will simply say that most conservative rabbis and authorities will accept women's testimony these days. But why we do and why we didn't is beyond the scope of tonight's discussion. But now we have this argument about whether he did or didn't do it. He still did it unwittingly, but the question is, did he actually do it? Because now we have evidence from one side that said he did, evidence saying from the other side saying he didn't. So he is liable to bring a provisional guilt offering. That is to say, it's a guilt offering that you bring because you are uncertain as to whether you committed a sin that required a sin offering. Right? So he's not sure whether he actually did it, but he thinks he might have done it. And because he might have done it, he brings that provisional guilt offering rather than the standard guilt offering. Okay. And the reason, of course, that he's not sure is because he has some evidence that he did, but some evidence that he didn't. Let's add another wrinkle. If a witness says he ate forbidden fat, and the person himself says, I did not eat forbidden fat, he is exempt. Right? So if you have your neighbor who says, hey, that was forbidden fat, right? That was chelev. And he says, no, it wasn't. Well, then he is exempt. That is not considered evidence that he violated the mitzvah. It's not evidence that he did eat it. And therefore, he is not liable for the offering. He is not responsible to bring that offering. Now, you might find
so he can be sorry.
No. So go ahead. You're probably asking the question I was about to talk about. Go ahead.
He can be a self-witness. That's very unusual.
Well, because he's not witnessing about an action that is in debate by other people. He is a witness for what he did. So it's not exactly witness, it's more like information. And if the one person says that he did it, he's allowed to say, I don't think I did. I don't think I did eat forbidden fat. And in such a case, it's his word versus another person's word. Now, if there were two witnesses, then those two witnesses would be able to, by the weight of their testimony, say that he did do it, even if he himself said that he didn't.
But everyone will start to say, no, I'm innocent. I don't believe that someone will say, yes, I'm guilty. So if they accept I forgot the word, they word, okay. So always they will have already one in their favor. Like the systems are a little rigged some way.
Okay.
Yeah, because you always will say, no, I didn't do that because I don't want to bring and sacrifice if we can prevent it. Like going to Jerusalem, especially, and bring a sacrifice that costs also money.
Okay, so let me just hold on.
Yeah.
Your evaluation of human nature is one way to look at it. But I think you need to give equal weight to the fact that many people will want to do the right thing if they realize that what they did wasn't the right thing. There are many people who feel regret when it's brought to their attention that they did something wrong, even if they could get away with saying, no, they didn't. Even if they could make a fuss and perhaps change the outcome one way or another. You know, it'd be like if you had a car crash and, one person was in his own mind very clearly at fault, right? He went through the stop sign. He wasn't there. He wasn't where he should have been. He wasn't paying attention, whatever was going on. And he hit someone else. Now, theoretically, if there were no other witnesses and no other bits of evidence, when the cop shows up or the insurance people are investigating, he could lie and say, no, I didn't go through the stop sign. He was speeding and came down the street too fast. And if there isn't additional evidence, it could be that he would end up better off. And the insurance might split the responsibility and divide the liability between the two people. They might still give him a higher burden than the other person, but anything from 100% liability down is winning for him. But there are people, lots of people, who wouldn't do that, who would say to themselves, I can't believe I hit that person. I was so stupid. Why did I do that? And they would be more than happy and willing to admit their mistake because they would not want the guilt of carrying the deed and essentially stealing from the other person because they are lying about what happened. And you have to respect that both in the modern world and in the ancient world, a large portion of people would want to fix a sin. They'd want to fix what they did wrong if it was brought to their attention, even if people didn't have enough evidence, enough proof to make them do it. So in this case, we really have to view it with the benefit of the doubt that the neighbor thinks that what you ate was forbidden, but you did to the best of your knowledge and ability, remove any of the forbidden fat, and you are reasonably confident that you didn't, and therefore there's no reason for you to need to bring a sacrifice. Now, if we move out of this category into something like a contract law, where we have an issue where it's not the neighbor thought you did something and you thought you didn't, but something actually happened. A tree fell on my house, a car hit me, your animal and my animal had a fight and one of them is dead. Then just saying, yes, you did, no, I didn't, we'll have to end up before a court. But what the court is saying here is that we don't have to go to court when it's a case of he said, she said about something that didn't involve him. Right? The first witness is not hurt by whatever just happened. The first witness is merely providing information. Oh, and we lost Natan, so I don't know whether he's hearing this explanation or not. But let's go ahead and read the second half, because the second half goes on to the question of what happens if you have multiple witnesses. So if two witnesses say he ate forbidden fat, meaning they looked over the fence and saw him, and the person himself says, I did not eat forbidden fat, Rabbi Meir deems him liable to bring a sin offering. So they say, nope, you are absolutely responsible. Two witnesses, you must have done it. You're responsible for this. Rabbi Meir said, the conclusion can be derived a fortiori, a kal v'chomer, if two witnesses could have brought him to liability to receive the severe punishment of death because he had transgressed a forbidden action, can they not bring him liability to sacrifice an offering, which is relatively lenient? So he's saying if their testimony in like a capital case would be enough to convict a person to death, two people say you're a murderer, you say you're not, tough. Their testimony, if it stands up in court, could bring you to execution. Then why would their witnessing not be sufficient to bring you to have to bring this sin offering? The rabbi said to him, witnesses are unable to render another person liable to bring an offering contrary to his statement. As, what if he wishes to say, I did so intentionally, in which case he would be exempt from bringing an offering, right? He would be able to say something different. And this is a principle that we've seen a few times in the Mishnah, that there would be a way for him to get off the hook entirely by just saying, yep, I ate it, but it wasn't by accident. I did it on purpose. Ha ha, got you. Because the punishment for the on purpose action wouldn't be a sacrifice. And since the witnesses do not meet the standard for having witnessed and warned him before a deliberate act, he can't be punished for the deliberate act either. So he would get off scot-free. Since he's not saying that, he's not saying he ate it on purpose, but is simply saying, I didn't eat it at all, meaning any of the forbidden fat, then he is presenting a weaker position. And by presenting a weaker position, we can consider him to be more honest in what's going on. To the best of his knowledge, he didn't eat the forbidden fat. And therefore, to the best of his knowledge, he is not liable to have to bring the sacrifice. Again, if he's not sure whether he ate it or not, and two other people say he did, then indeed, he has to follow their testimony and bring the offering. And if one person says he did and one person said he didn't, and he's not sure, he has to bring the preliminary, the provisional offering in case the one who said he did something wrong is correct. I wish Natan had been able to get back on, but hopefully he'll be able to hear the recording and see that logic. Any other questions or comments from the group? All right. Mishnah number 2 is continuing our eating metaphor, or example, I guess. It's not really a metaphor. If one unwittingly, and we're going to continue on with unwittingly for most of this discussion, if one unwittingly, accidentally ate an olive bulk of forbidden fat, and then ate another olive bulk of forbidden fat during a lapse of one awareness, that is, in a case where he did not discover in the interim that fat is forbidden, or that the food he is eating is forbidden fat, he is liable to bring only one sin offering. All right, let's make sure we got this down. So he eats at least the minimum shiur, the minimum measure, which is an olive's worth, a small amount. He eats that small amount, and then he eats another small amount, right? And he does it either by not knowing that chelev is forbidden at all, he is completely clueless on this topic, or he knows that chelev is forbidden, but he didn't think this was it. But he is completely mistaken, and when it's brought to his attention, he admits that, oh, I did eat that, but I didn't know that was chelev. Then, because those multiple eatings happened within only one state of ignorance, he only has to bring one sin offering as a remedy. right? It was one ignorance, therefore one offering. Even though there were multiple transgressions, they were all covered, subsumed, included within that one time period of ignorance. Making sense? Yes? Okay. Case number 2. If one ate forbidden fat and blood and pigul and notar, those are all different sections or different prohibitions of things to eat in one lapse of awareness, meaning he was completely out of it and when he ate those 4 things, or he was unaware of all 4 of them while he was eating them, that they were transgressions or that they were under the category of these 4 things, he is liable to bring a sin offering for each and every one of them. 4 offerings in this particular case. So if he eats 4 times from the same thing during one ignorance, 1 offering. If he eats once from 4 different things under one state of ignorance, he still has to bring 4 offerings, 1 for each of the 4 different laws that he transgressed. Now, the Mishnah points out this is a stringency that applies to one who eats several types of forbidden food and does not apply to one who eats one type of forbidden food. That this is a stringency. It is worse to eat the same quantity and under the same conditions 4 different things, or rather 4 things that violate 4 different prohibitions, than it is to eat the same amount, the same type of under one category. However, there is a stringency that applies to one who eats one type of forbidden food and not to one who eats several types of forbidden food, meaning it does also work the opposite direction, that sometimes eating one thing can create more stringencies rather than eating 4 different things. And that is, if one ate half an olive bulk and then ate another half of olive bulk during the lapse, that is in a case where they are both from one type of forbidden food, he is liable to bring a sin offering. So if you eat half a measure and then another half measure, and they're both from the same thing, forbidden fat, for example, then the 1/2 plus 1/2 of the same thing equals a full measure, and that means you have now transgressed and you have to bring a sacrifice for that action. On the other hand, if they were from 2 types, meaning 2 separate types, like fat and blood, so I ate a little bit of fat, less than an olive, a little bit of blood, less than an olive, he is exempt because he did not eat an olive bulk from any specific forbidden food. So technically, he didn't reach that threshold of the minimum shiur from which you are liable for the sacrificial offering. So again, this is all about an accidental eating. Don't go out thinking that you can have like tiny M&M size bits of different things and get away with it. But if you found out that the M&M you ate wasn't actually an M&M, but it was actually chelev, you would not be liable for the sacrifice. You would not be liable for bringing the sacrifice. However, if all those M&Ms were chelev and you ate a whole bunch of them so that they added up to being more than an olive's worth, then you would be responsible for a sacrifice for that act of eating the chelev. But it would still just be one sacrifice because it was one lapse of awareness. Now, if you happen to forget every Tuesday what this rule is, for whatever reason, just as it's a bizarre example, then for however many Tuesdays you did this, you would then be responsible. However, if you just were unaware of it from birth until 25, well, that would only be one act of unawareness and therefore one sacrifice. This is very interestingly, I've always thought, a way that the Torah tries to make the act of becoming a Baal Tshuva, of becoming committed to the behavior of Torah, to the mitzvot, a little bit easier. Because you can imagine if you were to come to the rabbi and the Kohanim and say, you know what, my whole life, no one taught me about any of these things, and I've been doing all of this. but now I want to make it right. What kind of sacrifice do I have to give? If they said, well, how many times in your life have you eaten forbidden fat? And you worked it out that it was 5,612, you're not going to bring 5,612 sacrifices just for the forbidden fat. And so by having the rule that it's by one lapse of awareness, even if it's a very long one, that you are liable for only one offering, it makes it a little bit easier. There's still more than one offering, but it's still a lot less than if you had to bring something for everything you'd ever done, each act in your entire life. Okay, moving on to Mishnah number 3, which is continuing this idea of eating. We've now worked out that our minimum measure is an olive's worth. And we've worked out that that olive's worth can be combined, meaning if you have half an olive or half an olive, put them together, that can equal 1. But how much time can one expend while eating an olive bulk of forbidden food and still be liable for violating the prohibition, right? If I have, go back to my M&M example, if I have one of the fatty M&Ms in the morning and I have another fatty M&M at night, does that count as eating an olive's worth in total? Or if I have one fatty M&M and then I wait 2 seconds and have another fatty M&M, does that count as combined as one eating? And does it have to be in the same mouthful? That is the question that this Mishnah is going to answer. The duration is calculated as though he were eating toasted grain. What does that mean? Well, it means which one eats one kernel at a time. Much like we have snack food now, they would roast grain, the actual like kernels of grain from the inside the wheat or barley or oats or such, before it gets ground up and smashed into flour. And they would roast that as a kind of like crunchy snack. And you would eat those one at a time. If he eats the olive bulk of forbidden food within the amount of time it would take to eat an olive bulk of toasted grain, he is liable, right? So that's the statement of Rabbi Meir, that if you go boom, 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 and by the time you've eaten an olive's worth, you could have and would have eaten an olive's worth of toasted grain, then that's one eating setting, because we consider the toasting grain snacking to be one eating divided into multiple bites, because that's the way people eat it. And thus, if you do that with the forbidden food, it counts as one eating, Rabbi Meir position. And the rabbis say, meaning the other Hachamim, the sages as a majority, unless the amount of time he expends from beginning to end is more than the time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread, he is liable. So they give a different measure, rather than being specifically equal to an olive's worth of toasted grain versus an olive's worth of forbidden food, but instead by saying it's a more general window of time of how long it takes you to eat half a loaf of bread, then you are liable. And similarly, likewise, one who ate a quarter loaf of ritually impure foods or drank a quarter log of ritually impure liquids within the amount of time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread is rendered unfit to partake in truma, right? Again, because you are eating the forbidden food, then you are not able to have the truma, the portion of produce designated for priests, until he becomes pure. Similarly, if one drank a quarter log of wine and into the temple, and he remained there for the time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread, he is liable, because you're not supposed to drink under those circumstances. Rabbi Eliezer said, if he interrupted his drinking of the quarter log of wine, or if he placed any amount of water into the wine, he is exempt, that it doesn't count as wine-ish enough to go. Interestingly enough, Rabbi Elazar is the one who wins that particular argument, that does count as enough of a buffer to reset the clock. Natan, yes, you have your hand up.
Yeah, question, Rabbi. What does it mean the time that takes you to eat half bread or the wine? like eat consecutively, or what happens if I eat? I'm like here half hour and maybe a little more. So what does it mean, like eating? Like, how do you measure what is eat half bread according to what standards?
They mean eating it directly. That you eat half a loaf start to finish, like not how long could you stretch out your lunch break, but how long does it physically take to eat that amount of bread when you are eating it in one go.
Yeah, but you can play with your bread in your mouth to push, to extend as much as possible, and it could be at the end much something like 20 minutes easily.
Okay, so I mean, this does open up a number of different types of arguments, and that's the commentators in halakha begin, and the Talmud first of all begin to argue about this and exactly how big is the loaf of bread. How many beitzim, which is the measurement of flour, the egg size of an egg, went into making it. So yes, the Mishnah looks clear, but you are raising all the right points, that how big the bread is, how hard is it to eat that particular bread, how much do you have to chew that particular bread, all of that can make more details, which is why this argument goes on long past this Mishnah. So it's not going to be answered finally here. There's a reason why we have the Bavli and why we have the law codes, because it doesn't get answered always very simply in the Mishnah itself. But you're asking the right questions. All right, Mishnah number 4. There is a case where one can perform a single act of eating of an olive bulk of food and be liable to bring 4 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering for it. All right, so this is going into the competition of how many things can I transgress at one time, right? You are trying to break as many mitzvahs at once. So how does this work? The halakha applies to one who is ritually impure, who ate forbidden fat, and it was left over from a consecrated offering after the time that it was allotted for his consumption, what we call notar, which was mentioned before, and it's on Yom Kippur, right? So if you want to really, really break a lot of rules, be ritually impure, eat the forbidden fat from a leftover offering past its normal time, and do it on Yom Kippur. Because if you do that, you are liable to bring sin offerings for eating forbidden fat, and for eating the notar, and for eating the meat of an offering while impure, and for eating on Yom Kippur. Plus, you are also liable to bring a guilt offering for the misuse of consecrated property, something that was designated for ritual use, and you used it incorrectly for non-appropriate purposes, carries with it its own particular transgression. So you're able to get yourself in trouble 5 times. Rabbi Meir says, if it was Shabbat and he carried it out from a private domain to a public domain while eating it, he would be liable to bring an additional sin offering for performing prohibited labor on Shabbat. The rabbi said to him, that liability is not from the same type of prohibition, as it is not due to the act of eating, and therefore it should not be counted. So the rabbis are saying, yes, that would indeed be its own prohibition, but that's not really the eating's prohibition. That is a Shabbat prohibition. And therefore, it's not the chewing that's getting him in trouble, so to speak, which is what they were going for in their 5-in-1 in the first half of the Mishnah. I should point out again, this is not meant to be something you should do on purpose. You shouldn't set out to eat like, the double bacon cheeseburger with, extra oysters or something. Don't try and stack up your violations.
In Yom Kippur.
on Yom Kippur, while making a bonfire, yeah, it's in general, it's best not to stack your prohibitions. All right. Any questions on that little thought experiment of how many ways could you go wrong? Okay. Mishnah number 5. Let's do another thought experiment. There is a case where one can engage in a single act of intercourse, can have sex once, and be liable to bring 6 sin offerings for it. All right, so obviously you're doing something prohibited, but you're doing it in such a way that you will need to bring 6 different sin offerings in order to clear this up. How so? It is possible for one who engages in intercourse with his daughter to be liable to, due to having violated the prohibitions of engaging in intercourse with his daughter, right, obviously, and his sister, the wife of his brother, the wife of a father's brother, a married woman, and a menstruating woman. It is possible for one who engages in intercourse with his daughter's daughter to be liable to bring sin offering due to the unwitting violation of the prohibition of engaging with his daughter's daughter and his daughter-in-law and the wife of his brother and the wife of his father's brother and the wife of his sister, a married woman, and a menstruating woman. It's possible for her to meet all of those criteria. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, if the elder, meaning the man's father, who is the woman's great-grandfather, transgressed and married her, the man would also be liable for engaging in intercourse with her due to the prohibition of intercourse with the wife of his father. And likewise, it is possible for one who engages in intercourse with the daughter of his wife to be liable to bring six offerings similar to one who engages in intercourse with his own daughter for violating the prohibitions against engaging in intercourse with his wife's daughter, his sister, the wife of his brother, the wife of his father's brother, a married woman, and a menstruating woman. And it is possible for one who engages in intercourse with his wife's daughter's daughter to be liable to bring 7 sin offerings similar to one who engages in intercourse with his own daughter's daughter for violating the following prohibitions: engaging in intercourse with his wife's daughter's daughter, his daughter-in-law, the wife of his brother, the wife of his father's brother, his wife's sister, a married woman, and a menstruating woman. Now, again, all of these are intended to be accidental, and it would be unusual for it to happen. But what the rabbis are trying to continue in this discussion is not just what is the worst possible thing that could happen, but which types of transgressions can stack. We already talked about which ones don't stack in the terms of quantity of what we eat or don't eat, or within time or not within the same time. And now we are talking about other types of transgressions that do stack, that do create multiple transgressions, even though it is only one act of intercourse. Make sense? I mean, does the logic make sense? Yes, Aaron.
Rabbi, what are the main common things on why they stack? It looks like because they're violating different prohibitions is what the main reason on why they stack.
Yes.
But I noticed you can violate different prohibitions with a single act and they're still stacking them.
Well, that's their point, yes. If you violate different prohibitions with one action, then you are responsible for multiple sin offerings, because they are technically different prohibitions, even though your violation is only one act of intercourse.
But if you do the same thing, as long as it's an ongoing continuous event, then you only get you're only liable for one offering then, right?
No. So if my mind is reeling and trying to figure out how this could be an ongoing accidental act.
The olives would be the ongoing accidental act.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be, some form of really weird masquerade party or something. I don't know. But if you had more than one act of intercourse under the same unawareness, the same unwittingness, then you would bring one sacrifice for each of the prohibitions. So you would still have to bring 5, 6, 7 offerings for the action that you did, but you wouldn't have to bring an additional one for the additional times that you had sex with this person. So you would still have to bring a separate offering, though, for each of the prohibitions that were violated during this single act or the single time period of unawareness.
All right. So like if it happened like 5 times before you became aware, you'd only have to bring, you would not multiply it by 5, right?
Right. You would bring one offering for each of the prohibitions you had violated in that act, even though that act was repeated multiple times.
All right. Thanks, Rabbi. That makes sense.
Good. Okay. And let's just beat a dead horse. I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment, but I know it's not the most compelling narrative. At least I hope not. It is possible for one who engages in intercourse with his mother-in-law to be liable to bring 7 sin offerings for doing so, due to the unwitting violation of the prohibitions of engaging in intercourse with his mother-in-law, his daughter-in-law, and the wife of his brother, the wife of his father's brother, his wife's sister, a married woman, and a menstruating woman. And likewise, the same applies to one who engages in intercourse with the mother of his father-in-law or with the mother of his mother-in-law. So there are ways to get even more complicated prohibitions. By the way, if you want to look at the full family tree of how this works out, there are many good commentaries that will walk you through exactly how one person could be all of these things to one person. But I really don't want to go through the whole complicated relationships of the family tree. But it is technically possible to have one person that meets all of these criteria. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, it is possible for one who engages in intercourse with his mother-in-law to be liable due to the unwitting violation of the prohibition of engaging in intercourse with his mother-in-law and the mother of his mother-in-law and the mother of his father-in-law. Right, so he's trying to stack it in that way as well. But the rabbi said to him, those 3 prohibitions are all one category, derived from the same verse. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter. You shall not take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. Consequently, one is not liable to bring separate sin offerings for violating these prohibitions. So they do put a limit on how many things you can stack. If they all come from one category of prohibitions derived from that same verse, then while technically, yes, you are violating 3 different prohibitions, any one of which would carry a penalty, because all 3 of them are essentially the same type of prohibition, you only bring the one offering for all of them. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so we are going to pause there because we get a nice little narrative in the next one that sets us up for more discussion of the same topic. But I want to make sure that we can get back to the clear our deck for the narrative, so that we appreciate what else is going on in the next Mishnah. So we're going to finish here with Mishnah 6. I think we made some very good progress in chapter 3 today, and we'll pick up with chapter 7 next time.
Wasn't a chapter that you could have a lot of questions, or like it was pretty straightforward?
It's pretty straightforward, even though it's a little overwhelming with the lists, I know. Yeah. But again, don't focus too much on the details, since God willing, none of those details would ever be applicable to anyone involved. But focus instead on this idea of, if it's a different prohibition, it's a different requirement for fixing it. If it's the same prohibition and you were just unaware, then it's all covered by one attempt to fix it. That's really the largest takeaway from this. that, and the rabbis had very clever minds that could see lots of different potential problems.
Rabbi, I have two questions regarding programs. If you want to stop the live,
Just a second. Let me stop I can stop the live stream if you want to ask something that's more pertinent just to the congregation.
yes,
Hold on a second.
because
Takes a moment
I
for.
grab your attention, your time.
All right. So we are.